The 7 suns of the Kethmori system were dying, their light growing weaker each day as the cosmic horrors drained their energy. High Consul Tevik stood in the ancient temple, his 4 eyes fixed on the beacon that had waited in silence for thousands of years. His clawed hand shook as he touched the smooth crystal surface. "High Consul," came a voice behind him. War Leader Gethak entered the chamber, his blue skin pale with exhaustion. "The reports from Zarian Prime are confirmed. The planet is ... gone." Tevik felt his heart sink. 3 billion of his people had lived on that world just yesterday. It was nothing but a dead rock floating in space. The Devourers had come like a plague of nightmares, their massive ships appearing from the darkness between stars. "How long did they take?" Tevik asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. 12 hours, Gethek replied. 12 hours to drain every living thing from an entire world. Our fleet tried to fight them, but their weapons passed right through the enemy ships. It was like trying to fight shadows. Tevik walked to the great window that looked out over his city. The crystal spires that had stood for millennia now showed cracks from the orbital bombardments. His people moved through the streets below, their faces filled with fear. Children clung to their parents, sensing the terror in the air, even if they did not understand it. "The Devourers are not like other enemies," Tevik said quietly. "They do not want our worlds or our resources. They want our very life force. They feed on the energy that makes us alive." Gethek nodded grimly. "And they are moving toward our core worlds. Military command estimates we have perhaps a week before they reach the capital system." The weight of leadership pressed down on Tevik like a mountain. He was responsible for the lives of trillions of beings across dozens of worlds. His people had built a great civilization among the stars, creating art and music and knowledge that had enriched the galaxy for thousands of years. Now it would all be consumed by creatures that existed only to feed. "What of the evacuation ships?" Tevik asked. "Moving as fast as they can, but there are too many people and too few ships. We might save a few million, but the rest..." Gethek did not finish the sentence. Tevik turned back to the beacon. The ancient device was covered in symbols that his people had studied for generations, but never fully understood. Legend said it was built by the architects, a race of beings so advanced they had transcended physical existence. The stories claimed that in times of great need, the beacon could call upon divine powers to save the worthy. "You know what the old stories say," Tevik said, "that the architects left these beacons as a promise? If we ever faced extinction, we could call upon the gods themselves for aid." Gethok's expression was doubtful. "High Consul, those are just legends. Stories to comfort children." "Perhaps," Tevik replied, "but what choice do we have? Our fleets are destroyed. Our worlds are falling one by one. If there is even the smallest chance that the legends are true, we must try." Place both hands on the beacon's surface. The crystal began to glow with soft blue light responding to his touch. Ancient circuits awakened deep within the device, systems that had waited patiently. For this moment of ultimate desperation, "The beacon is activating," Gethok said, reading the energy displays. "The power levels are beyond anything we have ever measured." The glow grew brighter, and Tevik felt the device connecting to others across the galaxy. A network of beacons, all awakening together, all adding their power to the signal that would soon race across the void between stars. "We call upon the architect's promise," Tevik said, his voice carrying the weight of his dying civilization. "We call upon the gods themselves to save us from the darkness." The beacon erupted in brilliant light that could be seen from orbit. Quantum waves rippled outward at speeds faster than light itself, carrying a message of desperate hope to every corner of the galaxy. It was a plea for divine intervention from a species facing extinction, 10,000 light-years away, in the cold depths of space near Earth's moon. Admiral Park Jin-woo was finishing his evening reports when the alarms began to sound. The Luna Defense Station had detected something impossible, a signal that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Admiral called Lieutenant Kim Nari from her station. "We are receiving a transmission unlike anything in our databases. The patterns are ... incredible." Gin-woo moved to her console, his experienced eyes studying the data streams. 30 years of military service had taught him to recognize many things, but this was entirely new. The signal was complex beyond belief, layered with mathematical structures that spoke of an intelligence far beyond human understanding. "Can we decode it?" he asked. "Working on it, sir. But the basic message is clear. This is a distress call. Someone out there is asking for help." Jinwoo felt something stir in his chest. Throughout human history, people had always answered the call when others needed help. It was what made them human. "Prep the fleet," he ordered. "Someone is calling for help," we answer. The stars around the Kethmori homeworld suddenly blazed with new light as 17 human warships dropped out of hyperspace. Indomitable led the formation, its steel hull reflecting the dying light of 7 suns. Behind it came destroyers, cruisers, and support vessels, all bearing the blue and white colors of Earth's space fleet. Captain Lee Sujin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the alien world grow larger on the main screen. She had seen many planets in her career, but nothing like this. The Kethmori had built cities that reached into the clouds with crystal towers that sparkled like jewels. Flying platforms moved between the spires, carrying the daily life of an advanced civilization, but the beauty was marred by destruction. Black scars crossed the planet's surface where enemy weapons had struck. Several of the floating cities were dark and lifeless, their crystal structures cracked and broken. "Look at what they built," said Navigation Officer Choi Minho, his voice filled with wonder. "Those cities are like nothing we have ever seen." Sujin nodded, but her expression was grim. "Someone is trying to destroy it all." Communications opened a channel to the planet. The first contact between humans and the Kethmori was not what either side had expected. The aliens had activated their ancient beacon, hoping to summon gods or divine beings. Instead, they found themselves looking at creatures much like themselves, bipedal, breathing air, speaking in calm voices about military strategy and supply lines. High Consul Tevik appeared on the main screen, his blue skin pale with exhaustion. His 4 eyes showed confusion and desperate hope as he stared at the human faces before him. 12. "You are not the architects," he said, his voice carrying across. "The translation system. You are not divine beings." Admiral Jinwoo stepped forward, his weathered face showing the calm confidence of a career military officer. "No, we are human. We received your call for help and came as quickly as we could." "But the beacons," Tevik protested. "They were meant to summon the gods themselves, beings of pure energy who could save us from the darkness." Jinwoo shook his head. "The beacons summoned us. We may not be gods, but we are here to help." Through the translation computers, Tevik began to explain the terror his people faced. The Devourers were not ordinary enemies who wanted territory or resources. They were creatures that existed partly in normal space and partly in other dimensions. They fed on life itself, draining the energy from entire worlds until nothing remained but dead rock. "They've already consumed 3 of our core worlds," Tevik said, his voice breaking. "Billions of our people are gone. Our fleets tried to fight them, but our weapons pass through their ships like they are made of smoke." Sujin listened to the translation with growing anger. These creatures were not just invaders. They were parasites that destroyed entire civilizations. "For food, Admiral," she said. "Request permission to conduct a reconnaissance mission. We need to see what we are dealing with." Shh. Jinwoo nodded. "Take the Soul's Pride into escort ships. But be careful. We do not know what these things can do." Sujin's small task force jumped to hyperspace, heading for the contested world of Kalar 3. When they arrived, what they found was beyond anything in human military manuals. Massive organic ships hung in space like living creatures, their surfaces covered in tentacles that reached down to the planet below. The world that had once been green and blue was now gray and lifeless. "Captain," reported Sensor Officer Park Hyunwoo, "the enemy ships are not showing up normally on our scanners. They seem to exist in multiple dimensions at once." Sujin watched in horror as the alien ships continued their feeding. Long tentacles of energy stretched from their holes to the planet's surface, literally sucking the life out of the world below. Plants withered and died, oceans turned to dust, and the very air itself seemed to lose its color. "They are not just killing," she reported back to the fleet. "They are harvesting. taking the essence of life itself and leaving nothing behind. The first battle came when 3 Devourer scout ships detected the human presence. The creatures moved like living nightmares, their forms shifting between solid matter and pure energy. Their ships changed shape constantly, growing new weapons and tentacles as needed. The Devourers had faced the Kethmori energy weapons before. Plasma beams and particle cannons passed harmlessly through their phased forms. They expected the same from these new arrivals. They were wrong. All ships target the central mass of the lead vessel, Sujin ordered. Railgun batteries full spread. Fire. The human weapons were different from anything the Devourers had encountered. Instead of energy beams, solid metal projectiles traveling at incredible speeds smashed into the alien ships. The creatures tried to phase out of normal space, but the kinetic rounds struck faster than they could react. The first Devourer ship exploded in a shower of organic matter and strange energy. The second tried to flee, but more railgun rounds tore through its hull. The third lasted only seconds longer before it, too, was destroyed, for the first time in months. The Kethmori monitoring stations detected something impossible, Devourer ships being destroyed. Hope began to spread through their communications. Networks like wildfire. Admiral Sujin reported the enemy can be hurt. Their ability to phase through matter has limits. Fast-moving solid projectiles can damage them. Ginwu smiled grimly. Then we know how to fight them. All ships, prepare for battle. We have work to do. The war room aboard the Indomitable buzzed with activity as humans and aliens worked together for the first time in galactic history. Long tables were covered with star charts, tactical displays, and strange organic samples that pulsed with their own dark energy. The air hummed with translation devices as 2 very different species tried to understand an enemy that defied all logic. Dr. Yang Haijin bent over her microscope, studying tissue samples recovered from the destroyed Devourer ships. Her hands moved quickly across the holographic controls, rotating 3-dimensional models of alien cells that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. "This is incredible," she muttered, adjusting the display. "The tissue samples show that these creatures exist partially in our dimension and partially in others. It is like they are living in several realities at the same time." War leader Gethak sat across from her, his blue skin marked with the scars of countless battles. His 4 eyes studied the human scientist with curiosity. In all his years of military service, he had never worked with another species before. "Our weapons have always been energy-based," Gethak explained, calling up holographic displays of Kethmori plasma cannons and particle beams. "For thousands of years they have served us well against all enemies. But these Devourers simply absorb the energy and grow stronger." Admiral Jinwu studied the tactical data with the eye of an experienced commander. He had fought pirates, rebels, and hostile aliens throughout his career, but nothing like this. The Devourers moved in patterns that made no sense, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. "The problem is that your people have been fighting them the wrong way," Jinwu said. "Energy weapons feed them, but they cannot phase through solid matter when it moves fast enough. Our railguns and missiles work because they are physical objects, not energy beams." Gethak looked at the human weapons data with interest. "Your technology is much more primitive than ours," he said, but his tone was respectful. "Throwing metal projectiles instead of using pure energy. But against these enemies, primitive seems to work better." Colonel Beek Duhayon, the Marine commander, leaned forward in his chair. His weathered face showed the confidence of a man who had led soldiers through countless battles. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. My Marines are ready to board. Those ships, if needed, we have explosives that can blow holes in anything." Dr. Haijin looked up from her samples. "And I think I understand why they are vulnerable during feeding. When they drain life energy from planets, they have to fully manifest. In our dimension, that is when they cannot phase through attacks." The first test of their combined tactics came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected a massive Devourer force approaching the mining colony of Zarian 7. The planet was home to 3 million Kethmori, workers who extracted rare crystals from the planet's core. If the Devourers reached them, it would be another massacre. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump," Jinwu announced over the fleet communications. We are going to show these creatures what happens when they pick a fight with Earth. The combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 17 human warships took the center, their hulls bristling with railguns and missile launchers. Around them, 23 Kethmori vessels provided support, their crystal hulls glowing with power. Below them, the Devourer fleet was already at work. Massive organic ships hung in space like living creatures, their tentacles reaching down to the planet's surface. The mining colonies were already going dark as the life energy was drained from them. All ships, this is Admiral Park. Jinwoo's voice carried across the communication channels. Today we show them what steel can do. Attack. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships launched waves of nuclear-tipped missiles while Kethmori vessels used their advanced sensors to provide targeting data. The combination was deadly. Kethmori precision guiding human firepower. The Devourers tried to phase through the attacks, but the solid projectiles struck faster than they could react. Explosions bloomed across their organic hulls as missile after missile found its target. For the first time in the war, the creatures were taking serious damage. Captain Oh Seungmin led the most dangerous part of the mission. His marine boarding parties used small assault shuttles to reach the Devourer ships while they were distracted by the fleet battle. The shuttles were equipped with drill attachments that could punch through the organic hulls. Breach successful, Seungmin reported, as his team cut through the alien ship's outer shell, moving to target the feeding apparatus. The interior of the Devourer ship was a nightmare of organic corridors and pulsing walls. Strange fluids dripped from the ceiling, and the air itself seemed to whisper with the voices of consumed souls. But Seungmin's Marines pressed forward, their training keeping them focused on the mission. Charges placed, Seungmin announced as his team retreated. 30 seconds to detonation. The explosive charges were designed to target the Devourers' feeding mechanism. When they detonated, the creature's own feeding tentacles turned inward, draining its own life force. The massive ship convulsed and imploded, its death scream echoing across space. The remaining Devourer ships tried to flee, but more human missiles and Kethmori targeting systems tracked them down. One by one, the organic vessels were destroyed, until only debris remained. First blood to the good guys, Jinwoo said quietly, watching the enemy retreat. But his expression remained serious. This was only the beginning of what would be a long and terrible war. The darkness between the stars suddenly erupted with light as hundreds of enemy ships emerged from hyperspace. The Devourer High Fleet had arrived at the Kethmori capital system, and their numbers were beyond counting. Organic vessels the size of cities drifted through space like living nightmares, their surfaces covered in feeding tentacles that writhed with hunger. At the center of the fleet moved something that defied belief. The Great Devourer was larger than most moons, its massive form blotting out entire constellations. Tentacles of pure energy reached out from its surface, each one capable of draining the life from an entire world. This was the creature that had consumed thousands of planets across the galaxy. Growing stronger with each meal, Admiral Jinwoo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable. Watching as his sensors tried to count the enemy ships, the numbers kept climbing 300, 400, 500 vessels. His own fleet had grown to 37 ships, reinforced by emergency deployments from Earth, but they were still vastly outnumbered. All ships, battle stations, Jinwoo commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet communications. This is what we came for. Today we stand between these creatures and everything we hold dear. The human fleet had a secret weapon. The Prometheus was the largest ship humanity had ever built, rushed to completion in Earth's orbital shipyards. Its antimatter weapons had never been tested in combat, but Dr. Hygen's calculations showed they might be able to penetrate the Great Devourer's dimensional barriers. Captain Lee Soo-jin watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as the enemy fleet began to move. The smaller Devourer ships spread out in a feeding formation, their tentacles already reaching toward the Kethmori homeworld. Billions of lives hung in the balance. The enemy ships are beginning their feeding pattern, reported Sensor Officer Park Hyun-woo. They are targeting the orbital cities first. Soo-jin gripped her command chair as the battle began. The Kethmori fleet moved with desperate courage, their crystal ships dancing through space as they provided covering fire. Energy beams lanced out from their weapons, not to damage the enemy, but to confuse their sensors and provide targeting data for the human missiles. The Indomitable led the charge, her railguns blazing as she carved through the enemy formation. Solid projectiles smashed into Devourer ships, tearing through their organic hulls faster than they could phase out of normal space. Explosions bloomed across the battlefield as human missiles found their targets, but the enemy was fighting back. Tentacles of pure energy reached out from the Devourer ships, trying to drain the life from the human vessels. Several smaller ships were caught in the feeding beams, their crews aging decades and seconds as their life force was consumed. Admiral Su-jin called out as alarms blared around the bridge. "We are taking heavy damage. Hull breaches on decks. 7 through 12. We have lost main power to the port side." Ginwoo watched the tactical display as his flagship took hit after hit. The Indomitable was dying, but she had to hold position long enough for the Prometheus to get a clear shot at the Great Devourer. "Hold position," he ordered. "The Prometheus needs a clear shot at the target." As if hearing his words, the Great Devourer turned its attention to the human flagship. The massive creature's central eye, larger than a city, focused on the Indomitable. Tentacles of pure energy reached across space, beginning to drain the life from the ship itself. Ginwoo felt his strength ebbing as the creature fed. Around him, his crew began to age rapidly, their hair turning white and their faces showing the lines of years passing in seconds. The ship's hull began to crack as even its metal structure was drained of energy. All hands abandoned ship. Ginwoo commanded through the ship's communications. "Emergency evacuation, now." The gate pods began launching from the Indomitable as the crew evacuated. But Ginwoo remained at his post on the bridge, his weathered hands steady on the controls even. As the Great Devourer continued to feed on his life force, "Admiral, you have to go," Su-jin pleaded, but Ginwoo shook his head. "Someone has to make sure this works," he said. With the last of his strength, he activated the ship's self-destruct sequence and rammed the Indomitable directly into the Great Devourer's central mass. The explosion was visible across the star system. The Indomitable detonated with the force of a small sun, her nuclear reactors overloading as she struck the creature's core. For a moment, the Great Devourer's feeding tentacles stopped moving, and a gap appeared in its dimensional barriers. Captain Su-jin, now commanding the fleet from the destroyer Soul's Pride, saw the opportunity and seized it.
Ow!
"Ships, focus fire on the breach. Prometheus, you have a clear shot. Take it." The massive ship Prometheus fired its antimatter torpedo directly at the gap in the Great Devourer's defenses.
Ow, the weapons
Struck the creature's core, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Then the Great Devourer began to implode, its massive form collapsing in on itself as the antimatter reaction tore through its body. The creature's death scream echoed across subspace, a sound of pure agony that shattered the coordination of the remaining Devourer fleet. Without their leader, the organic ships began to flee, their formation breaking apart as they scattered. In all directions, the battle was won, but the cost was terrible. Admiral Park Jin-woo was gone, along with half the crew of the Indomitable. Yet across the system, the surviving Kethmori wept tears of joy and gratitude. Their worlds were saved, their children would live, and they would never forget the humans who had died to protect them. The great crystal cathedral of Silent H had stood for 10,000 years, its towering spires reaching toward the stars like frozen prayers. Now it was filled with beings from two worlds, humans and Kethmori, gathered together in a ceremony that would change the galaxy forever. High Consul Stevik stood at the center of the vast chamber, his four eyes reflecting the light of countless crystals. Around him sat the survivors of the greatest battle in galactic history, human officers with their simple uniforms and Kethmori, leaders with their flowing robes. The air hummed with translation devices as two species prepared to forge a new future together. "We called for gods," Tevik began, his voice carrying across the cathedral. "When the darkness came for our worlds, when the Devourers threatened to consume everything we had built, we activated the ancient beacons and begged for divine intervention. The assembled crowd listened in silence. Many of them had lost friends and family in the war. The humans had sacrificed their flagship and their admiral to save a species they had never met before. "But you came instead," Tevik continued, looking at the human survivors. "You are not gods. You are mortals like us, with fears and hopes and dreams. Yet you proved something we had forgotten, that mortals can be divine through their choices." Admiral Kim Nari stood to accept the Kethmori's offer of alliance. She had been promoted to fill Admiral Park Jin-woo's place, a responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders. The ceremony was simple, but profound, two species united by shared sacrifice and mutual respect. "Admiral Park always said we help because that is what we do," Nari spoke to the assembled crowd. "Not because we are stronger or better than others, but because it is the right thing to do." He died believing that, and his sacrifice saved billions of lives. As the new alliance took shape, reports began arriving from across the galaxy. The beacon network was vast, stretching across thousands of star systems. Other species had detected the signals and were activating them in their own times. Of desperate need, the Valenti Empire, a proud warrior race, faced mechanical invaders that converted living beings into machines. The Gossamer Collective, beings of pure thought, battled a plague that turned their minds to madness. The crystalline hegemony fought entities that existed in 11 dimensions and could attack from angles that should not exist. Each distress call was answered the same way, with human ships carrying steel and determination, arriving not as conquerors, but as allies. Earth's shipyards worked around the clock, building new vessels and training crews for a war that spanned the galaxy. Captain Oh Sungmin stood on the bridge of the newly rebuilt Indomitable, watching his mixed crew prepare for departure. Were human marines and officers. The other half were Kethmori warriors and scientists. They worked together with an efficiency that would have seemed impossible just months ago. "Sir," called Lieutenant Lim Jae-sung from the navigation station, "we are receiving another beacon signal. The source appears to be ... everywhere. It is like the entire galaxy is calling for help." Sungmin smiled, remembering Admiral Park's words before the final battle. The old man had believed that helping others was simply what humans did, not because they were special, but because it was right. "Then we better get started," Sungmin said. "Set course for the first system. Show them what happens when humans answer a prayer." The ship's hyperdrive engaged with a flash of light, carrying the Indomitable toward another war in another system. Behind them, more human ships prepared to follow, each one carrying the same message, that help was coming, that someone cared. They were not alone. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy learned what it meant to have humanity as an ally. Human ships appeared wherever the beacons sang, bringing weapons and supplies, medical aid and military expertise. They asked for nothing in return except the chance to help. The Valenti Empire learned that human boarding parties could destroy mechanical invaders with simple explosives. The Gossamer Collective discovered that human doctors could treat mental plagues with basic medicines. The crystalline hegemony found that human physicists could understand 11-dimensional enemies better than their own scientists. Each victory brought new allies, new friends, new members to the growing alliance. The galaxy was learning that the age of gods had ended, replaced by something far more reliable, people willing to fight for strangers. To stand between the darkness and the light, Dr. Yang Haijin, now serving as the Alliance's chief scientist, studied the beacon network from her laboratory on Earth. She had discovered that the ancient devices were not just communication tools. They were a test. The architects had built them to identify species worthy of inheriting the galaxy's protection. "The beacons do not call for gods," she explained to the Earth Council. "They call for people who will answer when others need help." Humanity passed. That test the moment Admiral Park decided to respond to the Kethmori's distress call. In the depths of space, more beacons began to sing their ancient songs of desperation and hope. Each one was answered by human ships carrying steel and fire, honor and sacrifice. The galaxy had found its protectors, and they wore the faces of those who simply chose to help when help was needed. The humans had become the guardians they never expected to be. Protectors of a cosmos that called out for gods but received something. better mortals who chose to be divine through their actions, and in doing so, they had proven that the greatest power in the universe was not divine intervention, but simple human decency.